going to make this garden poof. This is a real size garden poof. It measures about 23 to 24 inches across and about 11 inches high. And it's actually made to sit on. You can sit on it, you can rest your feet. It looks delicate, but I am telling you, it is made to be used, not just a pretty item in your living space. And this project is even like an upcycling type of project because I'm gonna have you find all kinds of used clothing and fabric scraps and all that to fill this poof with. It's not really just about filling it with the fiber fill that we typically use. You wanna have a nice dense poof. And as you can see with mine, I kept it in the blue family with my fabrics. And of course my greens, also my favorite color, and keeping that part more natural, but I wanted a blue poof. Of course you can make it any color you want, you can make it super colorful. I'm sure anything you do will be fabulous. And when you look at my fabrics, I have velvets, I have all kinds of linens and just polyesters and you name it. It really is a gorgeous piece of artwork. So yeah, I want you now to not only download the pattern and tape it together, but I also want you to start finding some things to stuff it with. And I'll give you more ideas of that in the tutorial. So like I always tell you, download that pattern and let's get it going. Patterns for this course consist of leaf patterns and petal and flower patterns. And once you create these flowers and petals, you can apply them to whatever home decor or fashion accessory you choose. So for the leaf patterns, I have designed and created for you pattern leaf A, B, C, D, and E. Various shapes of leaves. And then for the petals to create the flowers, I've created petal A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, that will be cut on a fold line, and I. So let me show you how to create all the leaves and flowers, and then you'll have a variety for your garden mix. Here are the leaves that you can create with these patterns, and depending on the fabric that you choose, you'll get a different outcome. So for leaf A, I decided to use a very soft silky material. So the leaf, when I apply it and sew it down to somewhere, wherever I choose, will be really flexible. Then for B, this version, I created one side velvet and the other side a little bit heavier weight cotton to help it hold its form. But because it was velvet and it tends to shift and move when you sew, it came out a bit smaller. And same thing for C. And here I decided to actually add some sewing in there. So if your sewing machine has decorative stitches, you don't even need to do a regular stitch like I did, and you can just embroider all kinds of designs in there. It's completely up to you. And same thing with this one. I decided to add a little extra embroidering in there with the machine. You can even hand embroider if that's what you love to do. And here I use very different fabrics just to give it a different look. So they are all created like a pouch. You sew them together and turn it right side out. So what I'm going to do now is show you the flowers, and then I'll take you one by one and how to create them. But once you create one, you pretty much know how to create the rest because they're pretty simple, the leaves. And here are the flowers that you can create with the flower and petal patterns. So just like I mentioned with the leaf patterns, depending on the fabrics that you use, you're going to get a bit of a different outcome. So let's start with A. Here I used a very sort of silky polyester, kind of like a lining of a dress. And in the center, I added a pom-pom. And I'm going to go through all of these and show you how to make them. Here I used a little bit of a stiffer fabric, and you can see that it holds its fabric, or its shape, I should say, much better. And for the centers, you can leave them plain, or you can use beads or any kind of broken jewelry pieces if you save that, because it does add something to it. Really pretty and interesting. So for C, I actually used spandex because when you cut spandex, the edges don't fray, and I wanted to try something different. And this is really floppy and definitely interesting. And then we'll just jump around. I'll go to G, which is an oval put together and kind of cinched here in the center, and again a piece of jewelry in the center there. And for all of these cutouts, when I tell you cut out 8 or cut out 10, it's telling you how many pieces you need for one flower. And for 8, I use like a bengaline fabric, and I really love the way this holds its shape. And I'll show you how to make the little folds in here so it gives it some of that dimension. And this one's a bit flatter for pattern E, where you can see I decided to sew a pearl in the center. And then D, I just didn't create for whatever reason, nothing in particular, but you can pretty much see what you would get for D. So again, cut out 10 because each petal pattern is made of 2 sides and you're going to have to sew it together to create one. So in fact, this you're cutting out 10 pieces so that your flower can have 5 petals. And for H and I, you're going to hand sew this one. These are machine and hand sewn, but this one here for H and I are going to be all hand sewn. And you're just manipulating the fabric in a way where we're twisting around and just doing some stitches under to keep the twirls in place. I call them twirls or the whatever. Okay, so let's move this along. We'll start with the leaves and I'll show you how to put them together. I'm going to start with leaf pattern D and show you just how simple it is to create. So I'm using a polyester fabric with a little print in there, embossed in. And I'm gonna fold it right sides together like I just did, pin and cut it out. So I'm cutting 2 to make 1 leaf. And you can make as many leaves as you want and whichever leaves that you want. My fabrics are cut out and pinned right sides together. We are going to sew on the sewing machine using a stitch length of about 2.5, and I'm going to start here on the flat edge. So the flat edge is my opening. I'm not going to close that, and I'm going to sew and do a back stitch there and a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around, keeping the nice shape and ending off there with a back stitch. So I'm keeping a 1/4 inch seam allowance and back stitching on the end. And I go very slow on the tip here because I do like to keep the rounded tip and that look. And back stitch on the end. Before I turn it right side out, I like to give the curves, or wherever I have a curve, a little snips so that it does turn nicely and clean and you don't have those jagged points. So right here at the tip, I'm going to just cut that off. And you're going to be careful you don't cut the seam. Okay, now we turn it right side out and we're going to give it a press. I use my fingers first to do all the pressing right side out, and then my favorite tool is a chopstick to get in there and to really press out the edges. And here's where you're going to make sure all of your seams are closed. So now you're going to give it a press so that it does sit flatter. But if you don't want your leaf to sit flat and be a bit more flexible, you don't have to do this part. And as you're pressing, you're going to make sure that your seams are pressed out. And if not, you could give them a press like I am doing right here, making sure the seam is pushed out to the edge, and press. You can leave your leaf like this, or you could go back to the sewing machine and give it some embroidering. I'm going to do that. But here's what I want to tell you. There's no need to close up the end here because this end will always be sewn down to wherever it is that you are sewing. If you want, you can turn it in and sew it up. If you want, you can, but there's really no need to because you'll see when I sew it down, it will always be covered. Here's where you're also always the designer because you're going to have to choose which type of stitch you're using and also the color of your thread. I love green, so I'm going to keep all my leaves in the green family. So this is what I'm doing now, using green. So I'm going to first give it a nice outlining or top stitch, and then after I do that, I'll go in and I'll use some embroidering to make it look pretty. I'm going to decide to give it a point at top that way. And then when it comes to the decorative stitches, if you decide, I do it all freehand. But if you want, you can also draw it in with a chalk marking pencil so that the marks come off, whatever you find comfortable. And I do backstitch on these decorative stitches because it will come out. And I just continue this. I always start from this point here and I create my new lines. As my thread got a little tangled in there. And I do clean up as I'm working so that it makes it easier for me. I think I'm going to add one more here. Now I'm going to repeat this process for the other side. Here we have one leaf complete. I'm going to give it another press. And I'm going to continue and create a few more. All of the leaves are created in the same exact way that I've just shown you. You basically sew them together and it's like a pouch. You turn it right side out, and if you decide, you do your top stitching and so on. The only little piece of advice I'll give you is if you find it hard to turn your fabric around because of your fabric choice, you can, instead of leaving your opening down here for certain leaves, so if you think this is too small, you can leave the opening up on top. Just be careful and try to choose like an area that is straight, because if you do leave it up on top, that part of the leaf does show in wherever you're applying it. So you're going to have to make sure that you turn it in, give it a good press, and do your top stitch. But other than that, all these leaves are created exactly the same. Now moving on to the flowers, I'm going to show you how to put together Petal Pattern A. This one here, I used a pom-pom in the center, and like I mentioned before, you don't need to put anything in the center, but it is kind of fun to find things to make your flower more interesting. And this one is a bit more floppier because of the soft, silkier type fabric, but this time what I'm deciding to do is to use a very thin canvas so that this flower will hold more of its shape. Here I'm feeling it's a little bit hollyish, kind of Christmassy, and I decided to change it up and go pink. pink more. So remember, you're the creator here. Any fabric or different fabrics that you choose will give you a different outcome. So what I'm going to do now is sew on my sewing machine with, again, about a 2.5 stitch length, leaving the top here open. And I'm going to sew using a 1/4 inch seam allowance all around the detailing. So I'm going to go really slow so that I get to actually keep all of this all of these rounded curves here. I'm going to continue with the green thread so that you can see my sew line. Back stitch on the end. When you get to a point, you'll want to pivot. Leave your needle in and turn. And using the hand wheel is absolutely a good idea. And I'm going to backstitch on the ends. Before turning this right side out through your opening, what you'll want to do is wherever you have these points here and corners, you are going to give it a snip. The points you're going to clip off without cutting your seam line, and then you're going to give these little snips. So snips all around the curves. We'll turn your petal right side out. So again, I'm going to use my fingers first to press out all the edges and little corners. And then whatever doesn't come out, I use my chopstick. So what I like to do is refer to the pattern to know what I may be forgetting to push out. When it's all pressed out, the edges and your corners, I'm going to give it a press. Before I think I'm done, I always run my chopstick inside just to make sure the seams are all pushed out. See right there, I want to make sure I have that curve in there. It just adds more interest to the flower petal. Okay, and here. Now, at this point, I'm going to call this one done, but remember I said that you are the creator here, but you can, for example, thread your machine with purple, give it a top stitch, do some fancy scrolls in there, make it really pretty. You can do anything. So what I'm going to actually do is... Actually, I'm not going to call it done. I'm going to go onto my machine and just give it some sew marks in there just to add more interest to this flower. And I am going to keep it green because I want it to reflect back and kind of coordinate with the leaves in there. And green is my favorite color. So let's do this. What I've decided to do is start from the bottom here and create and sew curved lines that come up and meet the corners here of the flower petal. Again, you can change your stitch length. I'm going to change mine to about a 4 stitch length, and you can even use, whatever you do here, you can even use a decorative stitch. It's all up to you. It's all free. Any color you want, you go for it. And of course, you can even leave it plain. And I'm actually not going to give it a top stitch. I'm going to backstitch on the end so it doesn't fall out. Okay, and we're going to do it here. Now, you can mark it first if you want. I decided not to, and to just wing it. I'm going to give this one a little curve. And one last one. That's what I have here, and I'm going to repeat this to all the other leaves of mine. Now, to sew these together, what I'm going to do is use a button thread because it's a little bit thicker, because I decided to sew these petals out of this canvas. But for this one, I use a regular thread because this is a lot thinner. So you'll want to double thread your needle, and for the button thread, I just single threaded it, and I have a nice thick knot at the end. And what you're going to do is bring two together, and you're going to sort of create like a 3D effect where you're going to bunch them here. So what you do to create that is you just make a very light stitch at the bottom. And then you're going to do the same thing here, a nice light or basting stitch at the bottom here. And if you notice, when I pull, it kind of just scrunches it together. And the same thing for the third one. And then here's why I use the button thread. When I bring this together and I pull tight, I don't want it to break. But again, if your fabric is thin and you're using a regular sewing thread, that's not going to happen. So these are the two that I'm going to bring together here. See, all three are stringed. So on this one here, I'm just going to put a stitch through it and give it a pull. If I was using a regular thread, it would have probably snapped right there. And look at how this stays together. Of course, you are the designer here, so you can add more petals if you want. You can add less. You could do whatever you want. I decided to create it with 3. So once I give this a pull, I'm going to take my thread and just give it a wrap around, just to ensure, and as I'm wrapping, it's tight, just to ensure that's all held together. And then once I did that, I'm just going to push my needle through, and this is where you may need a thimble. I luckily didn't need one right there. I'm going to pull, and I'm going to double that up. And pull, put my needle through the loop, and give it a nice little tug and trim. Now for this, I'm thinking this looks great as is, but you can easily sew a pearl into the center, which will give it a different look. You know what? I think this one needs that. So next time you do this, don't cut off your thread just yet, and just continue there and add your pearl. I'm going to bring my needle through the back, give it a press through. I'm just going to feed the pearl right in. And since this is button thread, I don't have to go through the pearl a few times. One is more than plenty. I'm going to bring it back, and I'm going to do another end off stitch in the back. If you know you are not going to be washing your flower, you can even decide to hot glue this on, but be really careful with the hot glue, because after all this work, you really don't want to get any hot glue anywhere else on the flower, because it will ruin it. And you know hot glue, if you've ever worked with it, it's not coming off. I'm going to do 2 tight end off stitches. And now here we go. We have this beautiful pink flower with our center pearl. Pattern B is put together the same exact way as we just did for pattern A. And as you can see here, I also decided to add a little bead in there, and I left this time the petals plain. Pattern C, you put it together again the same exact way that we put together flower A and B or pattern A and B. But in case you've chosen a fabric that just like mine doesn't fray, I'll show you how I did this one. So when I tell you cut 10, that means you'll need 10 pieces so that when you sew together, I'm just using this as an example, when you sew these together, there'll be 2 each, you know, a front and a back. So if you want your flower to have less petals, obviously you'll cut less, but in numbers of 2. But for this, again, if you've chosen something that doesn't fray, I'll show you how I did mine. I'm just going to use however many petals I have here. And all I did was string them all together. So here's how I did that. My double threaded needle. And I just strung them all on. Sewing at the end where the straight edge is. If you have a fabric that is rolling up like mine, you can give it a press to keep it still and flat. And here we go. This is also a thought and a look. Now, you know, you can cut out fabric that frays. That's also a look. It is, you know, it was trending a while ago where you have these fabric flowers with all the little frayings on the edges. That's a look too. If you love that, then go for that. Cut out your fabric without sewing the petals together to get that look. Again, I'm going to repeat and I'll stop, but you really are the designer and creator here. So you do it the way and the look that you like. So I'm just going to make sense of this in what order it is before I put it together. Okay, so what you want to always do here is take your very first petal and attach it to your last petal. That's how you keep the order here. So this is my last petal and this is my first petal, and I'm just going to bring them side to side together. Here we go. Let me do that again. I'm going to bring it side to side together and give a little attaching stitch there, a few of them, and that's how it does stay. And I'll close off on the back, making a few of these ending off stitches. And now you have your flower. That needs a nice little press so it behaves, like this one. Pattern D is put together the same exact way that I've showed you for A, B, and C. And of course you can change the amount of petals. I'm giving you this one and I don't have a sample for it, just to give you different size flowers if you like that look of variety and size. Moving on to E, this one is slightly different, the same but slightly different, and I'll show you how to put this one together. So I've chosen a fabric here that does hold its form for this very purpose, but again, you choose what you like. I've gone ahead and cut out my 8 petal pieces, and what I'm going to do is sew them right sides together, leaving an opening here on the bottom. You're creating these petals with a fabric that's a bit hard to turn right side out. You may want to make your opening larger. It's your call. So you're going to leave your opening not on the rounded end, but on the flatter ends. Back stitch on the edge. And back stitch on the end. Before turning this right side out, just give your rounded edges snips so that it turns around much nicer and smoother. And then you're going to flip it right side out. And you're going to give it a nice press. And you're going to do this to all 4 of your petals. If you see you have an edge here that's not as rounded, you probably didn't push it out all the way, like I haven't, and that's how you fix it. And you know what? Even if it's not perfectly rounded and smooth, it's okay because these are flowers and they are not all perfect. So just like in nature. So make the other 3 and then we'll sew them together. What I'm going to do now with my 4 petals complete is I'm going to give it a little fold right at the bottom here where the edge is raw and not finished. I'm going to just fold it over and do a quick back and forth stitch on the sewing machine. And I'm going to do that to all of my petals so that it gives them a little depth. And now what you're going to do back on the sewing machine is you're going to place these right on top of each other and you're going to do another stitch right over that. If your machine can't handle the thick fabric, then you can also sew this by hand. And you're going to do the same thing here. I've enlarged my stitch to a 4 so that the needle goes through easily. And I'm going to back stitch right over that. And there we go. Same thing with my other 2. Is to sew these one on top of the other. So at this point, you know if your machine can handle that heavy duty work. If not, you can start sewing it by hand. The last thing to do to finish this off, or you can leave it plain if you use the matching thread, is you can sew something into the center. So these are, again, pieces of broken jewelry that I tend to save because I'm very creative and I always know there's a need. So to give you some ideas, like here's a button that's very easy to sew on. And literally a button that looks like a button. You can do anything with these centers. I think I'm going to add this one, also a piece of a bracelet that is broken and I saved. You can also, if you don't have anything like I just showed you, and instead you may have pearls or beads, you can do like 3 or 4 beads right in the center. So if you've decided not to put anything in the center, just make sure you use your coordinating thread. So I'm just going to sew this gorgeous piece of jewelry into the center because I feel like a garden theme, like anything goes. And the more colorful and creative you make it, the more beautiful and interesting it'll be. That completes this version of the flower. So to move on to the next, this is petal and pattern F. And again, this one has some depth and it's actually pretty 3D. So let me show you how to put together this one. You're going to need 8 petals cut out. And by now you know how to do this. You're going to take them, sew them together, leaving the opening here and turn it right side out and press it. I've decided not to do any top stitching or any embroidery, but you can change that if you'd like. So go ahead and create your 4 petals. The 4 petals created, what you're going to do is give each of them a fold on the straight edge here, and you're going to sew a line right across that to hold it in place. So I also do a back stitch over the line just to give it more secure hold. Now that I've sewn across the bottoms here on all of them to hold in the fold, I'm going to place them together, and I'm not going to even say right sides because both sides are good sides. I'm going to place them together and again repeat the same stitching down and back up to hold it in just with 2 petals. Leave the other 2 free. This is very thick, so I'm going slow, and then I'm going to back stitch right over that. To finish the flower, you will need a double-threaded needle. So take one of the free petals and fold it, and you're going to just fit it into this open space here. See how it's already forming? And how we attach it is we're literally going to just sew these edges here together. And that's hand sewing. So I have my double threaded needle, which I am going to need my thimble for this one because I'm using canvas and it is a bit thick. So I'm going to make a few stitches in here, holding it together. And when you bring it through, mine's a bit difficult, but when you bring it through, you're going to make sure you put your thread through, or the needle, sorry, through the thread to just lock it. And I would do about 1/2 inch up. I would continue these stitches up that way. And this is a blanket stitch, or similar to the blanket stitch that you would use when sewing the edge of a blanket. All right, and you're going to continue this to all the other sides as well to attach it. So to finish sewing this one petal on, I'm just going to squish it into this corner and sew on this side the same exact way we just did with the opposite side. I'm attempting to use a hand sewing needle that is a bit thinner to get this through. You can machine sew it, but I felt you had a better view with me doing it all by hand here. So do about 4 or 5 blanket stitches, and the higher up you go this way, the more depth your flower will have. So if you close it up to here, your flower will be fuller. I kind of want my petals to lay a bit flatter, so I won't go up all the way. And you're going to put on your other petal the same exact way in that extra open space here. Don't fuss over the back if you see the fraying threads and all, because that's not going to even be visible on your final product. So for the last one, like I mentioned before, you're going to squeeze it into this other open space and attach it the same exact way with the same stitching. And when it's in place, I'll just flip it over. Right now you can see it is a really pretty 3D flower. And for pattern G, this type of flower, what you're going to do is cut out 6 of these ovals. And right sides together, you're going to sew them all around, 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving an opening on the longer side, either this side or this side, doesn't matter. And then you're going to turn it right side out and press it. So you basically have ovals that are turned right side out. I'm going to leave my opening right up here, and I'm going to continue sewing with my green thread. Back stitch on the end. Your 3 petals sewn together and turned right side out, you're going to take the raw edge or the unfinished edge that sticks out, and you're going to turn it in, but you're going to try and keep the nice curve of this petal. And then you're going to press it so it stays in place. And you're going to do this to all or the other 2 remaining. And for this one, we are going to need a top stitch because it will help close in that opening. And now I'm going to add the top stitch to close in the opening. And I didn't do a back stitch because when you meet this top stitch, you sort of lock it in place that way. And now I'll do the back stitch. And you're going to do this to the other 2 petals as well. The next step is to take these 3 petals and literally just scrunch them together. So a simple way to do it is to put a basting stitch, and I'm using a double-threaded needle with a coordinating thread. If you don't have a thread that coordinates all the way, don't worry, because you don't really see this too much, especially if you add a little something in the center of the flower, the completed flower. So I'm going to put another or last basting stitch in here. And I am going to, before I scrunch them, kind of line them up. And then I pull them together. Now, if you're using a regular thread, sewing thread like I am, it might not hold if you pull too tight. It may rip. Don't be frustrated. Just rethread your needle. So I'm not going to pull too hard, but I'm going to take it and I'm going to wrap it about 6 or 7 times, maybe more. And I'm going to decide where my back is. I'm going to say this is my back. So right there, I am going to put 2 finishing stitches. 1 and 2. Oh, there I go, ripping it. I'm going to leave that right in there, guys. If that happened, just continue with your rip thread. I'll show you how. This thread I knew wasn't the strongest, but notice how I'm holding it in place. I'm going to do that first and put another 2. So if that happened to you, you know me, I leave all my mistakes in. You could just continue. I'm going to actually add a 3rd just to secure it in, so that you don't become frustrated. It happens to all of us. And there we go, we trim. Before we trim, you can decide if you want to add something in the center of this. If not, it is ready to go. My other one, I'm actually going to leave this one plain. My other one, I had an earring, a piece of an earring jewelry. See, I save it all, and I stuck that on there. You could sew it on, or you can hot glue it on. It's completely your call. And that's how you make this flower. And finally, for patterns H and I, you're going to be creating these roses. And all you're going to be doing is hand sewing them with a double threaded needle. It's really a few stitches, and it's unbelievable how you can make these gorgeous roses. So this one is a bit smaller, I, and H is a bit larger. So I'll show you one, and they are both created the same exact way. Here I used a canvas, which is thicker, and it seems to hold its form more and is kind of like, you know, just stiffer and stronger. And this one is a lot looser, and I don't want to say flowy, but just softer looking. Every fabric is okay to use. It's, again, your choice. You're the designer, and you know the look you're going for. Pattern H, you are going to cut it on the fold line. So I have my fabric here, which is a rayon. I have it folded right sides together, and down here on the fold line, I'm going to place my pattern. And because this is a little bit of a slinky and this fabric moves a lot, I am going to just use these pattern weights and cut this out that way. Once your fabric is cut out, you'll open it up and you'll have a long rectangle, and you're going to fold it wrong sides together. Yes, I said that, wrong sides together. You want the right sides of the fabric looking up at you. And then with your double threaded needle, and I'm using just a darker colored thread, you won't see the thread, so it doesn't matter what color you use. You're going to sew up with a basting stitch. You're going to sew up one end. So you're just going to bring it right down to the opening or to the open end. You're just going to pull that through. So that's the beginning of your rose. And you're going to just give it a little fold like this, and then you're going to start your twirl. Always bringing together your ends. So if your ends are not neatly cut, you have nothing to worry about. Now notice how I'm just turning and just kind of folding the fabric in place. When you like what you have so far, like I do right here, I'm just going to go down where I have my scrunching together and my folding, and I'm going to put a few stitches in there. When I see that it holds, I actually am going to add another one in there. Okay. I see that it holds well, so I'm going to continue twirling. Now you can twirl you can, meaning turn it around as you add fabric, you can add folds in it, just like this. You see how I'm adding a fold and more is sticking out. The leaf is coming out more, whatever you like. And you may have to make one or two until you really get the hang of it and you like what you have. And each fabric gives you a different type of rose. So I like that, and I'm gonna just lock it together. Okay. Right, looking nice. And then as I come to the end, not yet, I'm gonna show you what I do with my fabric to really make the rose look like it's kind of opening. So I like that, so I'm gonna lock it in. And no one ever sees the bottom here because this is the area that you sew on to whatever it is, your pillow, your poof, your handbag. So don't worry about that fabric. Now towards the end, what I like to do, and you can do as well, is I keep it open. And as I keep it open, look at what a different finishing look it gives. So this fabric folds over a little bit more and it gives you this look. When you do it with a different type of fabric, you get different looks. So that's why it's kind of fun to play with this fabric. I say this is like sculpting, but instead of clay, you sculpt with fabric. So I'm gonna hold it right in place there. I'm gonna fold in just a little the raw edges. Now notice how I play with it too. I never get it right on the first time. I always try again. Actually, I'm gonna redo this part. Just like that. I'm gonna keep it more open. I'm gonna sew down that end right there. And you just keep doing these finishing closing stitches at the end. Now, if you're running out of thread like I am, just give it a good finishing stitch, rethread your needle, and keep giving these stitches under here where you have all your fabric scrunched and it came together until you feel your rose is held together well. And that's how you create these roses. You may have to make a few until you really love the effect that your rose has. Here's another thing you can do with your rose if you want to give it a different look or you're not very sure about the way it initially came out, is I rethreaded my needle, double knotted it, and I stuck it right into the center of the rose. And notice how I pull. It takes it down into the center, creates all that scrunching and raveling in there and folding. And if you take these, you can even fold these outwards like this. And look at how pretty that is. It's like a fully bloomed rose. I think I'm going to leave mine this way because I have all different types I've created, and just finish it off in the back. I always like to secure it with a few extra finishing stitches back here. And that's how you do this. So this is a little addicting for me, meaning like I love creating these, and once I start making one, like I can't stop at one. I just keep creating more, and then when I find other types of fabrics, I'm like, oh, I wonder what this one would look like, and I just keep going. So remember, this one I gives you a smaller rose, and then the H gives you a bit of a larger rose. To make the actual poof, you are going to tape together the poof pattern, which consists of 6 pages, and you're going to tape it together just like I did. So it's page 1, 2, under that 3, 4, and then of course right here 5, 6. Once you tape it all together, matching the circles, you're going to cut along the black solid line. Next step is to cut 6 of these out of your fabric. I've chosen this blue canvas because I'm thinking I'm going to keep mine monochromatic, all in the blue family. So I wanted this thicker type canvas so that when I stuff it, the stuffing really doesn't push up and really show through the fabric. So if you choose a thin fabric, that may happen. I've chosen my canvas trying to avoid that. So here we go. I'm going to use my pattern weights because this is a large object, and I figured it's a bit quicker to use pattern weights. And this is not that thick, this canvas, so I can get away with cutting 3 layers. depending on your fabric, you can see what you can get away with cutting at once. Once you have all 6 of your pattern pieces cut out, you're going to take 2 at a time and place them right sides together. So the right sides are touching, and then you're going to pin or clip them together. And I say clip because I decided to work with my clips here. And we will sew using about a 2 or a 2.5 stitch length on your machine. We are going to sew on the side that we have pinned or clipped. So with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to start on one end, do a back stitch, and go all the way around to this end. That's all you're doing with one. Backstitch when you reach the end. With it sewn together, and when you open it up, you can see it's already starting to build this sphere shape. So now what you're going to do is the same exact thing with the rest of the pieces. One by one, you're going to add each piece on the same exact way. So I'm going to take this end or point and I'm going to line it up with the other ones, and I'm going to clip it right into place. And I'm going to do the same exact sewing until I have all 6 pieces attached. And don't forget to backstitch on the ends. So just like before, I'm going to start sewing on one end, back stitching, and continuing all the way to the other end and back stitching. As I sew, I always make sure my edges are lined up because they can shift. You're going to sew all the way to the point, and when you get to that point, you're going to backstitch. And now you're going to continue and add the rest or the last 3 pieces until you have your full sphere created. Just continue sewing on the pieces the same way. Once you've sewn together all 6 of your fabric pieces, you can see that the sphere is pretty much created. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew closed these last 2 pieces, or the pieces that aren't sewn together yet. And I'm going to leave an opening from about here to the center, and that's about 9 inches. So if you want, you can actually mark it at about 9 inches, or you can even do 8. I like to leave it large enough for me to get the fabrics and the materials in there, and you'll see what I mean when I start stuffing it. And then we're going to do a blind stitch to close it off. And just in case your blind stitch isn't super neat, it's under the poof so no one will see it. So I'm going to mark it with my white pencil. So from the center all the way up, I'm going to say about 8 inches. So I'm going to leave this area open, and then the rest, just like I've sewn together the 6 panels, I'm just going to close this up, making a great back stitch there because it will receive some pressure as we stuff. And now for the exciting part of turning it right side out. So as you turn it right side out, I want you to look at both ends where all of your points join. And I want you to make sure that there's no space in there, that they're all sewn together well and there's no hole. So just double check that as you're turning it right side out. And this canvas that I chose has a brushed exterior, which I believe adds a really nice little extra touch to this poof. This one is Okay, that is open because this is the side that I'm stuffing. All right, so let's talk about what we're gonna stuff our poof with. You can use the typical fiber fill. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, being that this is a poof that I will literally be using in my living room, I don't want it to be so stuffed with this fiber fill because it won't be as strong. Meaning like, you know, it'll be a lighter weight poof. If that's what you're looking for, go for it, stuff it. You're gonna need a lot of stuffing, but go for it. But what I'm going to do with mine is I have these old bed sheets and I'm going to rip up these bed sheets. I even have fabric scraps that I saved. I have a bubble wrap that I no longer need and I have a lot of it. Plastic bags. I have so many different things that I'm going to put in here. So my goal is I'm going to start stuffing, and the top I'm going to have fabric, and the center I'm going to have all my bubble wrap and my plastic bags, and then on the bottom I'm going to have fabric. And my goal is I'm going to try to cover all around it with the fabric, because the plastic, I don't want when you touch my poof for you to be able to really hear that there's plastic in there, even though if you were to hear that, there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm going to start stuffing. I'm going to rip these sheets in strips so it makes it easier to get in there and you're not creating a clump inside. And I'm going to start sculpting away as I push in there. Here's my poof all filled up, and it took me a while to really get my hand into every one of these seams and push in all of my materials just to make sure that I didn't have any lumps and bumps. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to close up this opening here. And that is going to require a needle and thread. Once you have your needle and thread double threaded, what you're going to do is create a blind stitch. So you're going to fold over the edges, the raw edges of your fabric, just a bit, and you're going to start the first stitch from underneath. So pull it under so it hides your knot, and then you're going to continue and sew on the folded over part of the fabric. Small stitches, and then you're going to come across to this side and a small stitch. And you're going to keep repeating the process until you close it up. You can use another stitch because honestly, this is under the poof. No one most likely will see it, but I like to keep it clean. So I'm going to do my blind stitch right here. And I'm going to continue this until I get to the end. Small stitches staying close to each other. And the next step after you close up your poof is to apply the flowers and the leaves to the top of the poof. You can apply it even to the sides. It's totally up to you, but I'm going to apply mine all on top. So as you can see here, I did stick with the blue sort of monochromatic theme, but I did pick up on the greens here. I have all kinds of leaves that I've created, all from those patterns that I've shown you how to make. So I'm not sure if I'm using all of these or if while I'm applying, I may have to create some more flowers. Who knows? So what we're going to do for the first time is actually use a hot glue gun to apply it to the top of the ottoman. We are only going to spot clean the ottoman if you need to. It's not going in the washing machine or dryer, so it is totally safe and okay to hot glue. Like I mentioned, I don't have a specific direction or an idea of how I'm laying all this out, so we're just going to go with it, and whatever comes out, comes out. And I am going to focus just on the top, and I do know for sure that I want the leaves hanging over the sides, and I actually want some 3D leaves sticking up, so we'll see how I create that. But a note on the hot glue. If you've never worked with hot glue before, please be careful. It's very hot. And if you have, you know exactly what I mean. The only thing I'm going to tell you is that you're going to apply the hot glue to your flower first and then work with it that way and hold it down for a little. The hot glue is not forgiving. Just remember that. So you got to be really careful and work, just seriously work carefully because it won't come off fabric. So I'm envisioning this one in the center. I don't know why, but I'm just going to go for it. So I'm going to apply a generous amount. and go right to it. I suggest you hold it down for a few seconds. I think I'm going to put a few flowers around, and then what I'll do is actually start applying the leaves. Okay. Possibly I'll stick a leaf right in there now. Again, I love the layering look. Again, meaning I said it on the garden pillow one. Okay. All right, I think this is good. And then I'll stick my rosettes in there as well. The strings are annoying, but you'll clean them up after. The strings of glue, I mean. Okay. I need a new glue stick. These are my smaller roses. Okay. And you're just going to complete and continue this process until you get a look that you really love. You can also place them down without gluing them. If you watch the tutorial for the garden pillow, you'll see that I placed them down and I took a picture with my phone. Of course, you can do that as well. This one I figured I'd just do it freehand. And so far, so good. I'm going to stick a leaf here. So I've continued to add more flowers and leaves, but I just wanted to show you how I stick some leaves under the flowers just to get them to stand up like that. So for this one, I'm actually going to place the glue down first because this is a light fabric and I can see myself touching that glue. So notice how I fold it in there and I hold it up and it stays. I like, as I mentioned before, the layered look and having just some more dimension in there. And then I play around with the leaves. I stick some under, fold it. If you want some dimension, give it a fold. And just play around and keep adding until you're very happy with what you have. And after all the gluing and layering of leaves and flowers, I believe I have my poof to a point that I really like. I hope you enjoyed this one. I know it was a bit more time consuming, but it is so worth it because I know for sure you're going to get so many compliments when people see your amazing and very unique poof. See you in the next class.